This video is for students who are looking for more clarity on or some guided practice of the sourcing and evaluating reliability tool, which you can see right here. For the purposes of this video, we will be using it on a reading titled Confessions of Nat Turner, which is taken from day 14 of Unit 2. And to accommodate this, we will be completing the version that was embedded into this lesson, which runs several slides that are going to look like this. However, the skills and procedure of using this tool can be applied to any source that you want to assess the reliability of. The very first step of this process is to take a long look at its sourcing information and then the historical context in which it was created. And let me go back to the Confessions of Nat Turner source and to demonstrate this. So the citation information you will find down here. You will have the author, the publisher, the year, and all that important stuff. At the top, you will see the byline where you can see the creator of the source. And right below that, with most texts or images or sources, there will likely also be some sort of head note. And when it comes to placing this document in the world and time in which it was created, this is going to be very useful along with any other prior knowledge that you do have. In this specific lesson, the students had just used a ton of resources like data tables, an image, and a map to help them build this historical context. And let me also add that this specific source is very unique, and there is a lot of very important information in this headnote that we're going to find useful as we do our reliability analysis, so make sure that you read it. Because you are not going to see the sources used in this lesson to create the historical context about Nat Turner's rebellion, I'm going to enter the key takeaways from them as bullet notes here in the context space. But since sourcing and contextualizing are important skills for students of history to have, and they are the ones that you've probably been practicing a lot this year, you should combine these notes along with any prior knowledge you may have, plus relevant information from this headnote to create a 3 to 5 sentence paragraph for the context of the Confessions of Nat Turner in your own space. Next, we do a first read of the text. And usually when I'm doing this with my students, I tell them to annotate for any connections between what we just read and the sourcing and contextualizing work they had just done. Additionally, during this read, you should also make inferences, which are similar to hypotheses from science class, and also ask questions. If you were doing this on paper, it'd be easy to jot these down in the margins with a pen or pencil. But if you're doing it virtually, and let me pull up our text right here, if you're doing it virtually, you should use the add comment function, which I'm going to model for you right now. So let's say the first time I'm reading this, I noticed that in this first paragraph, or this first sentence rather, I noticed how there's a lot of religious terms and ideas. And a question I had was, I wonder how important his faith was to him, and did it have an impact on his actions? So what I would do is I would highlight that sentence like I just did. I would go to Insert, Comment, and enter it right here. Let me get rid of that. And I just entered the question that I have about this text. I'm now going to model a connection that I made between what I'm reading and the sourcing and contextualizing work that I just did. You can see here in the format that I noted this was an interview between Turner and his lawyer. And I saw a connection to this when I noticed that this source is organized into a question and answer format. So I'm going to highlight that purple. And it appears that his answers may also be recorded by the same person asking the questions. And this may be something that I'm going to think about a little later on. Another connection to the context I made during this first read is here at the bottom of the second page, where he had a vision of what appears to be a violent uprising by enslaved people. And this made me think of all the revolts and conspiracies shown on that map we used in this lesson to create our context, which again, you guys didn't see, but I entered it as a bullet point in the model. The point of all this is to really ensure that you know you're not reading this source in isolation. It's not an island. It is directly connected to the previous sources we've read and the context that you've created. Now that we have a pretty good general understanding of the text and how it is connected to the historical context in which it was created, we need to read it one more time, but this time we are really going to focus our attention. And we are going to want to think about the author's perspective, purpose, bias, and audience. Now, remember earlier when I mentioned the importance of that headnote of the source? I think that's a logical place for us to start. And in this model that I'm going to walk you through, I'm going to differentiate between the annotations from the first read with those of the second read by changing the highlight color to blue. So here's what I noted in the headnote. First, I did think it was a little strange that these were the confessions of Nat Turner, but they were written by someone else named Thomas R. Gray. Now, I don't know yet how this will impact its reliability, but it is definitely something to note when considering the author's perspective. We can see in this next part that I highlighted that it was actually his lawyer that wrote this down, but they used the word alleged confessions of his client right here. Now, the word alleged is definitely a red flag because it means supposed or believed to be, but not certain. And lastly, in these final two sentences right here, we get some more pieces of the puzzle. It says that some historians question how much of these words were actually Nat Turner's because of the tone and language, and they didn't seem to align. And this does make some sense. Gray, the lawyer, was the one who recorded the answers, so maybe as he was doing this, some words did get changed. But the question that remains is, did he do it intentionally? Because in this last line, we also learned that Gray was famously in tremendous debt, and a best-selling book with lots of lurid and insightful details from the man who tried leading a rebellion in an attempt to end slavery, that would probably make him a lot of money. But again, we don't know. We can only use the evidence presented to us and our analytical skills. If I take all this information from the headnote and enter it into the sourcing and reliability tool step 3, it's going to look something like this. And mind you, we didn't even start rereading the text itself yet to look for these things. And that's what makes this source so unique, is that it's the narrative of a person told through the words of another individual whose reliability might need some serious consideration. Most of the sources you read and apply this protocol tool to will not be like this. And the evidence of each of these factors would most likely come from the text itself. So for this text, being as unique as it is, we may find a lot of supporting evidence for what I just entered here in the passage itself. For instance, I inferred that since this was a written source, and back then most African Americans were legally or socially prevented from being educated or learning to read, his audience was most likely white people. And as Turner's rebellion happened in the South, white Southerners might have been curious about the man who led this deadly revolt, along with his motives and the steps he took. And to just connect this to the model that we're creating together, when I read this line here, where Nat Turner allegedly said, and there's that word allegedly again, that he believes that enslaved people who do not do their master's will should be beaten and whipped, that stuck out to me. Did Turner really say this, or is this something that Gray added for his white audience to perpetuate the idea of religion supporting slavery? Now, I do think that that line could definitely be an example of bias, and there's also clearly a connection to the audience, but I think it might actually fall more under purpose. So I'm going to add that right here. The next step is to look over all the evidence that you've just gathered and use your judgment as to how they influence the source's reliability. If you're unsure what the word reliability even means, you could break it down into its two requirements. A source is reliable if it is useful to historians and it is accurate. Did some of these 4 factors make the source more or less reliable in your eyes? For this model, I really do question the accuracy of this source. Although I do see how some historians might find it useful, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5. The last step is for you to provide your reasoning for this decision. When you do this, you should pick at least one of these 4 factors that you want to anchor your explanation in. For me, it was Gray's purpose that was the main factor that led me to believe it was fairly unreliable. So my rationale is going to focus on that. And here's what I ultimately came up with, which explains my concern about how his debt may have influenced what was included in this book. I hope this modeling helped, and remember, this tool can be applied to virtually any source that you want to assess the reliability of. Just don't forget the importance of first looking at its sourcing as well as its historical context.